Chapter 10 of Faery Islands of the South Seas. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Mike Venditti. Chapter 10. Costly Hospitality. For an authentic test of one's capacity for solitude, or better perhaps for convincing proof of the lack of it, two conditions are essential: complete isolation, that goes without saying, of course, and the assurance that such isolation will not be broken into. At Soul Eaters Island I expected to find both of these conditions fulfilled. My house was 4 miles from the settlement, but in reality I had no more seclusion there than a hermit whose retreat is within easy walking distance of a summer hotel. Visitors came in canoes, in cutters, and as the pass and the reef on either side of it were a favorite fishing ground, many of them came prepared to spend the day, or the night, or both. It is as well, perhaps, that the event fell out as it did. If life is to keep its fine zest, many wished-for experiences must be perpetually unrealized, and we perpetually following our alluring phantoms, until we tumble headlong out of existence. Not having been put to the proof, I may still persuade myself that I am a lover of solitude, gifted for the enjoyment of it beyond other men. Meanwhile, at Soul Eaters Island I had a further experience with Moy Ling, the Chinese storekeeper, which convinced me of very definite limitations in another direction. Some time after I had taken up residence there, the village came in a body to the adjacent island on the other side of the pass. During the year they moved in this way from one piece of land to another, collecting the ripe coconuts and making their copra on the spot. The land was not owned in common, but they worked it in common, and as house building was a simple matter, instead of going back and forth from the village, they erected temporary shelters and remained at each island in turn until the work there was finished. They were not unremitting toilers. After an hour or two of copra making in the cool of the early morning, they were content to call it a day, and spent the rest of the time at more congenial occupations, swimming, fishing, visiting back and forth, talking forever of the arrival of the last trading schooner and the probable date of arrival of the next one. During all of this time I kept open house, and since I was indebted to nearly all of my friendly visitors for past hospitalities, I felt that it was necessary to make returns. Unfortunately, I had nothing to make returns with except such supplies of provisions and trade goods as I was able to purchase on credit of Moy Ling. Fish were abundant in the lagoon, and a few minutes of fine sport each day more than supplied my wants. But I knew that fish was not acceptable to palates long accustomed to little else. Furthermore, having accepted at the time of my arrival at Retiaro the role of the generous, affluent papa, I had to carry it through. As previously related, although I had been left at Retiaro unexpectedly, the inhabitants took it for granted that I had plenty of money. The possession of wealth in the form of banknotes is regarded there as one of the attributes of a white man, as necessary to his comfort and convenience, and as much a part of him as arms and legs. Pride prevented my disillusioning them at first when I was in desperate need of a new wardrobe, but it got me into a devil of a hole with Moy, and I dug myself in more deeply every day. Having traded upon the native tradition of the mysterious affluence of all white men by opening up a credit account with the Chinaman, I had to sustain his confidence in my ability to cancel it at once if I chose, and feeling inwardly abject, it was all the more necessary to maintain a reassuring front in the face of his growing anxiety. It was growing. I could see that. He never actually dunned me, but I escaped the humiliating experience only by making additional purchases on so vast a scale, according to island standards, that even Moy seemed to be awed, for brief periods, into a stupefied acceptance of the mysteriously affluent myth. I myself was awed when I thought of the size of my bill. Trade goods carried across thousands of miles of ocean are more than usually expensive. A 1-pound tin of bully beef cost 9 francs, and other things were proportionately dear. The worst of it was that Moy's stock of supplies was much larger than I had at first supposed. He had a warehouse adjoining his store, which was full of them, and so, with guests making constant demands upon my hospitality, I was forced to buy with the greater abandon as his confidence waned. But I returned from these encounters with a washed-out feeling, regretting that I had ever accepted guile as an ally, and longing for relief from a state of affairs which I knew could not continue indefinitely. Relief came in historic 11th-hour fashion. Providence saved me when I thought pride was riding me to a starry fall. One evening I paddled across to the other island for further supplies. Faery and his family had been staying with me for several days. Fishing was better on my side of the lagoon pass, he said, but I think his real purpose in coming had been to eat my, or rather Moy Ling's, tinned beef. At any rate, when they returned I had nothing left. It was still fairly early, but no one was abroad in the village street. There was a light at Moy's shop, however, and looking through the open window I saw him sitting at a table, with his adding machine before him. He was counting aloud in Chinese, his long, slim fingers playing skillfully over the wooden beads which slid back and forth on the framework with a soft clicking sound. And as he bent over columns of figures, the lamplight filled the hollows of his cheeks and temples with pits of shadow. In repose his face was as expressionless as that of a corpse. I felt my courage going as I looked at it. What chance had I of carrying through successfully this game of beggarman's bluff? How long could I hope to maintain the fiction of affluence before a man wise with the inherited experience of centuries of shopkeeping ancestors? I had a moment of panic, and before I realized what I was doing, I had entered the shop and asked for my bill. Moy slip-slopped into his back room and returned with a large packet of old newspapers. He was a frugal soul, and kept his accounts as he ordered his life, with an eye to avoiding unnecessary expense. The journals were painted over with Chinese characters, the items of my various purchases. He arranged the lists in order, sat down to his counting machine again, and presently gave me the grand total. The amount was something over 4,000 francs. Thank heaven for righteous anger. Thank heaven for anger which is only moderately righteous. I knew that I had bought lavishly, but I had kept a rough estimate of the amount of my purchases, and I also knew that Moy had added at least 10% to his legitimate profit. He had reasoned, no doubt, that a man who bought on mere whim, without asking the price of anything, would settle his obligations as thoughtlessly as he had incurred it. And I would, of course. This was necessary if I were to live up to native tradition in the grand style. But when I saw how costly the game had become, and how thoroughly Moy had entered into the spirit of it, too, I felt indignant, and instead of confessing my predicament as I meant to do, I ordered another case of tinned beef and a bag of rice, and left the shop without further talk. This righteous wrath was all very well, but now that I had asked for my bill, I would have to settle it. How was this to be done? If only I had my sea-chest, which Tino, supercargo of the Calabash Winship, had carried away with him when he left me at Retiaro. My pocketbook was in it, containing all my money, more than enough to cancel the debt with Moy.